Hello and welcome to another episode of If My Feet Could Talk. So, here's a little catch up with me. I'm still running every day, getting closer to the 500-day mark in the next month or so. I've got a race coming up. Yay, finally. 6th of September, I'll be running 28.5 miles from Padstow to Foy for the Saints Way Challenge. Raced it last year. It was a pretty good event, so looking forward to it, although it be in a slightly different format to what it was last year. Sadly, the Fat Jack I was racing in October has been cancelled, mainly down to the National Trust not allowing events on their land currently yet under COVID restrictions. I was really looking forward to 84 miles of going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down on the southwest coastal path with some friends. But alas, I've still got a race happening in September, so I'm pretty pleased with that. Now, my next guest. I've had athletes of all sorts already on this podcast, ranging from Ironmen, ultra runners, of all levels, all with their own stories and stuff. And this guy is no different. He may not be an ultra runner. He may not be an elite athlete. However, he popped up on my Facebook. He was about to start an epic adventure from Land's End to Edinburgh via number 10 Downing Street, barefoot. He was barefoot walking 700 miles. But why? It was for the love of a daughter, his daughter. Have you ever wondered how far you would go for your child? Well, this guy did. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Chris Brannigan. Okay, recording. Afternoon, Chris. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm pretty good on. Thank you.
Excellent. So, how are you and the family doing? Now you're back together. How are you doing? How's life?
It's really good, because I was obviously out on the road for such a long time doing this event, which we'll no doubt speak about in a minute. And I just missed, well, I missed lots of things, but what I didn't realize I would miss was coming home and doing things like washing the dishes, doing the kids' laundry, watching TV with the kids. So getting back to normal everyday life was really cool, actually.
And what was life like during lockdown for you as a family before you started this crazy?
It was really tricky because we received a letter from the NHS saying that we had to shield Hasty. And, our kids love being out and love playing with other kids in the street, going to school and all that stuff. And then suddenly we were overnight into this sort of regime of not going anywhere and limiting our contact with the world. And I think the kids thought, woo, no school for about 4 days. And then after that, they got properly bored, and just wanted social contact and to go out and run around.
I bet they started to feel like you are when you're locked down in barracks somewhere and you can't go outside the wall.
Yeah.
Right. So I like to get my guests to introduce themselves to the listeners and the viewers. So tell us where you're from, Chris, and what you do.
So my name's Chris Brannigan. I am from Northern Ireland. I grew up in a small town in rural Ireland called Castlewellan, which is in County Down. It's just sort of south of Belfast, about 25 miles near the coast. And it was a pretty great place to grow up, I think, you know, in retrospect, because we grew up next to a huge forest park that had a lake and just, you know, miles and miles of this woodland that we sort of ran around like wild animals in when we were kids. So it was pretty idyllic in that sense, although at the time I thought this is duller than dishwater, you know, and I couldn't wait to escape. I work as a major in the Army. I work for the Adjutant General's Course, Staff and Personnel Support Branch. Essentially, we are the Army's sort of administrators and financiers and human resources personnel.
Excellent. So you mentioned you grew up in Northern Ireland. What was that like? Obviously, you touched word a bit about obviously the area you sort of lived in, but what was it like growing up? Because obviously you were still growing up during the time when we had a lot of issues with both terrorism and obviously the army being a main force over there. What was that like as a kid?
You know, I think my experience is probably dissimilar to lots of people because I grew up in a small town that was 99.9% Catholic. So in many ways, I was shielded from a lot of the stuff that was going on in, you know, more divided communities. So I didn't see a lot of violence or anything like that. But, you know, a fairly constant backdrop to our life was helicopters in the sky, you know, army vehicles moving around and seeing soldiers in the street. I remember I have 5 older brothers and sisters who are all sort of significantly older than me. So my eldest brother's 15 years older than I am. And he went to London to work and go to university when I was about 4 and he was sort of 18, 19. So we were always making these trips to the airport, which meant, you know, lots of stops at checkpoints, out of the car, searching the car, looking for things and devices. So it was an interesting place to grow up. But to be honest, you know, my experience was seeing soldiers running around and taking a knee on street corners made me want to be a soldier.
So that's quite an interesting thing because, you know, you would think for some people seeing what to some people believe an occupying force could be have the opposite effect on a child's mind, you know, being all big scary soldiers running around with guns, that sort of thing. But it made you want to join the army.
Yeah.
Which is quite surprising, really.
Well, I tell you what, so when to a wee boy, there's no armies of occupation and there's no just or unjust wars. To me, I was a wee boy who just wanted to play soldiers. And when you see soldiers walking around and they talk to you, we used to go and talk to them and they'd let us look through the sights and their weapons and stuff. You know, they were friendly. That just, you know, made me think, wow, being a soldier is cool. They look cool. They've got all the gear. They're friendly to talk to. They get to carry guns, you know. Yeah. And, you know, so in my mind, they weren't sort of baddies, if you know what I mean. They were goodies in my mind, and I wanted to be a goodie.
I guess if your parents raised you with that mindset as well, that they weren't baddies, you know, they weren't against it, then I suppose, you know, you didn't have that train of thought growing up either.
No, and I was never given that point of view at all. But there was lots of that out there, you know, and I wasn't entirely ignorant to that. But, you know, I think as an innocent wee boy, I just wanted to do adventurous things, and seeing people running around in fatigues and stuff like that just sort of whetted my appetite for a career in the military.
So were you sporty as a child? Did you play football, rugby or anything like
that? So the options available to me growing up in a Catholic community were limited in the sense that you could play football, was fairly common, but then it was Gaelic sports, so it was Gaelic football or hurling. So I played hurling
sports then.
Yeah, I mean Gaelic I never really got into, but hurling, yeah, is very fast paced and hard work. I really enjoyed that. I also did martial arts. I remember being 13 and a guy from our town who was maybe 4 or 5 years older than us, or maybe more than that again, sort of had done lots of jiu-jitsu and decided to open his own club, and we went to it, and I was just like, this is ace. So from 13 to 18 for 5 years, we were hardcore training at jiu-jitsu for a long time, myself and my friends.
So what age did you go to Sandhurst and join the army?
So I didn't join until late, actually. When I was in uni, I knew, you know, sort of after a year and a half, I thought I need to start planning my next steps, you know, on where I'm going to go professionally. And I looked at the RAF. Initially, I wanted to fly jets. I thought flying a jet would be just ace, you know, Top Gun sort of indelibly marked on the back of my mind. And, you know, my family actually scared me off that. So they sort of spoke to all my fears, you know, well, it's a long commitment. And I suppose for them, they thought it's dangerous and it's sort of military, you know, and there were lots of things they didn't like about it. And they scared me off. And I spent years sort of faffing about doing other jobs, work for banks and insurance companies and other things, and even ended up in Dubai for a number of years. And that was the clincher for me, because I remember looking around and thinking anybody else would love this, you know, this is an interesting part of the world to be in. But I just wanted to join the army and spent my lunchtimes looking at the army website. So I came back and I went to Sandhurst at 27.
Yeah, that's quite, yeah, it's quite late in life, to be honest, isn't it, for an officer especially. So obviously you felt when you were in Dubai you were missing something, and that void was obviously the military, as you now serving. So how long have you spent in the army now?
So I've been in for over 13 years now, just over, and I've loved it. I've loved every minute. It's been really great and kind to me.
And where have you been posted during your time so far?
So in my corps, I'm fortunate that I get to move around a lot and be attached to other units and other cap badges. So after commissioning, I went to 1st Battalion, the Royal Welsh, and they were based in Chester at the time. And we deployed on Herrick 11 to Afghanistan with them, which for them was a really hard tour. They lost lots of good people. I spent my time in camp really because my role was sort of supporting rather than out doing the business. I went from there and I did a long language course. I learned how to speak Dari, Farsi, that they speak in Afghanistan and in Iran, and then deployed on another op tour to Afghanistan as a military linguist, which was a bit more involved. And I got to work really closely with the Afghan army. I sat in their ops rooms during the operations and listened to what was going on. And then I was feeding back to our own ops room. So there was that coordination piece. And then I worked with 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, 1st Battalion, the Duke of Lancashire Regiment in Cyprus. I've worked in London District, supporting sort of ceremonial duty, currently working in the southwest of England.
So when you were on Herrick 11, and obviously with the guys out there, you said you didn't go outside the wire because that wasn't your job, but obviously you still had to deal with the atrocities of war that was coming back in through the gates. What was that like to deal with, seeing that and having maybe people you know quite well affected by it?
You know, it was really hard. And there was sort of a range of things. You know, I remember the first time we had a significant IED blast when I was there, and there was a young fella who I think was only 18 or 19. So he was really a young guy and fresh out of the box in terms of his army career and life. And he lost 3 limbs in that blast, and lots of fingers from his remaining hand, and facial injuries. You know, he was really badly hurt. And I had to go down to the hospital because these guys were being sort of evacuated from the theater and had to bring their passports and stuff. And I remember seeing those guys and just, you know, that's indelibly marked in my mind now. And even stuff like every time there was a death, everybody would parade centrally in Camp Bastion, and there'd be a service led by the Padre, and people who knew the individual or individuals who had passed away would talk about them. And that was really, really hard to cope with, I think. And listening to the last post, you know, all the time, that becomes linked with some fairly hard feelings. So it was difficult.
So obviously from that experience and stuff like that, you've obviously had to find some way of coping, because obviously it's never nice to lose someone anyway or see death, but sometimes in war, death isn't a case of someone sleeping quietly in their bed and passing away because it's their time. It's normally quite an horrific thing to deal with. So did you have to find anything to cope with that at all?
I think I didn't lose anyone that was particularly close to me, so it never really struck me in the way that it struck others, you know. But I always felt, you know, it was incredibly sad. And one of the saddest things was actually looking at the people who were left behind. You know, you could see people were really, really in a dark place, you know, and they were really hurting for the loss of a friend, or even just listening to the padre talking about the wife and kids and imagining what they must be going through at home, you know, having had a knock on the door, you know. It's all really scary stuff, you know. So it never really came home to roost, you know, in my family or anything like that. It was never really close. But I think in the military family, knowing what other people are going through, you know, is enough to really touch a nerve.
Yeah, because at your level of an officer, you're also a divisional officer. You're a line manager. You're going to have some sort of what's the best way to you're going to have to deal with guys that have gone through this. So you're going to have some compassion. You're going to have some empathy and what for the families and obviously for the guys on the field, because ultimately you could be pushing them guys back out the gate again to go again. So you must have learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, I did. I think, what did I take away from that? I realized you have to really cherish every moment, you know, because you don't know when you're going to run out of moments. Is the simple truth, you know. It's easy to get caught up in the turmoil of administration and paying bills and day-to-day life and all that kind of stuff. And Hasti's condition has really brought that home to roost as well, you know. And we've come across so many other families who have really difficult things going on in their life also, that, you know, even when it's hard, you have to really cherish those moments, because eventually you're going to run out.
So when did you get married?
So I got married before I joined the army in 2006. My wife's from Iran. I met her in Dubai. She very kindly, although perhaps foolishly, agreed to come back to the UK with me so I could join the army. And she was pregnant when I went to Sandhurst, heavily pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And I left her in what was essentially a foreign country on her own, pregnant, with very little support structure, so I could go away and be locked in a military camp for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. Which I think, looking back, was it was a really hard thing to do for me, and so incredibly hard for her. But, you know, I think it worked out in the end.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously you went then through Herrick and stuff like that. That couldn't have been easy for her at home, because obviously you know, it's easy for us guys that go away to some extent. It's our job. This is what we do. We go away. We do our duty, and fingers crossed, nothing bad happens to us. But the family left at home don't have that knowledge that, you know, they're always waiting for that doorbell to be rung, especially when we go off to a war zone and stuff like that. So it must have been quite hard for your lovely wife at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and when you know there are people who are receiving that knock on the door, you know, in the middle of the night, who are living on the same street as you, or, you know, just around the corner, you know, that brings it fairly sharply into focus, you know. But, you know, also the army looks after people who are, you know, on the rear party, if you want. They look after the wives and kids and dependents, and do lots of great work to keep them busy and happy and connected with one another, and help deal with any issues they might be having, you know, even if it's something simple like, I've got a really sick kid and I can't get to the doctor, someone will find a way to pick you up and drop you there. So she was well looked after. But yeah, I think there's always that ever-present worry that something might go wrong.
And you've got three great little kids now, haven't you? Is it 3? That's right.
Yeah, I've got 2 boys. Amir, who's 12, Naveed, who's 11, and then Hasti, who's 8.
And you've obviously kept the Iranian roots going through with their names and stuff like that. Have you named any middle names after some Irish ones, like Patrick or something in there? No?
No, we've gone Irish, or we've gone Iranian for first and middle names. So it's Amir, Hushang, Naveed, Reza's mum. But they have the Brannigan. The Brannigan thing will endure. So they've got that Irish tie. So we thought it's only fair that they have the Iranian sort of lead in.
That's great. And obviously they were born whilst you've been in the army. So they're used to of you being away, much like my boys used to me being away. It's for those that don't understand what it's like deploying when you've got children. It's tough, isn't it? It's hard for the person going away, leaving their children.
Oh yeah, incredibly. And it's not just knowing that you'll miss them. It's the feeling that you're leaving them unsupported, although they're going to have support. There's a welfare team and all that kind of stuff. They can't help you with everything. You've suddenly left your wife at home with 3 kids. In my case, when I went on my second Afghan tour, I had 2 little boys who were, I think, 5 and 4, or maybe 4 and 3. And Hasti was 6 months old, and very, very ill, and not feeding, and lots of medical appointments, So there's just a feeling of guilt that actually, by disappearing off to a war zone, that you've got the easier job, and you're leaving your wife in the lurch, and she's worried about you, etc. So it's really a tough pill to swallow.
So you mentioned Hasti, and we're slowly progressing to where we want to go towards your event. But when Hasti was born, was there any inkling on that? When you first hold that something might not be right, or was it later on that?
No, immediately. All the initial scans said Hasti was healthy and there was no issues, and she was, the appropriate size and weight. And then as soon as she was born and she was given to Hingame, we could tell when we looked at her, she didn't look normal. She had a red mark on her forehead, sort of like the skin was thin. You could see when she cried really hard, it would sort of get redder, if you want, like, not like a burn, but, you get the sense of what I'm talking about, hopefully.
Yeah.
And she had sort of mottled colored skin. She was quite jittery. She was moving a lot, which was abnormal, and she just looked different. So we immediately sensed that there was something going on. And then she had a seizure within a day of being home, and she refused to feed. She wouldn't drink even a drop of milk consciously. Really scary stuff. When you can't feed your child and your child's not growing and becoming dehydrated, that's frightening. And that took a long time to come to terms with all these issues. She had texture aversion, like babies are grabbing things and putting things in their mouth. Hasti wouldn't willfully touch anything, wouldn't put anything in her mouth, because she had this really severe reflux, which was burning her esophagus every time she was drinking. And the doctors gave us the wrong medicine deliberately because they didn't want to give us the right expensive medicine. I had to be evacuated from Afghanistan because her condition became so acute, and she was in intensive care for 3 days. That whole time was incredibly stressful and difficult, particularly for my wife.
Yeah, and obviously you've already had 2 children prior, so it's not like it was your first child and you didn't know how babies should act and stuff like that. So it wasn't like you're learning for the first time. You already had 2 children, which were pretty healthy. I assume there was no complications with them when they were growing up?
No, just 2 healthy wee boys, who, in compared to Hasti, were just like a walk in the park, and they had all the little sort of niggles that kids get, rashes and coughs and infections and things. But, so when Hasti was having issues, we knew something was seriously awry. And we now know she has a rare disease, which only affects a small number of children, GPs just don't know. They have no training in rare disease. They have no way of recognizing the signs or symptoms, and therefore you can't get any of the right care.
No, because that's a specialist thing, isn't it? It's a doctor that's specialized in rare disease, or they've specialized in a certain type of surgery. A general practitioner is that, isn't it? They're just, they're your box standard textbook answer type doctors. If they've not seen it or done some specific research into it beforehand, they wouldn't come across this sort of thing, would they?
Well, exactly. That is the situation as it exists in the UK now. But that should not be the status quo. So it's entirely possible that during the very long and extensive medical training that doctors receive, that they do a few modules on rare disease, so they understand when they see symptoms, they group together, they think, oh, that actually looks a bit like X, and they can refer to a book and then say, yes, I've learned something about this. But the problem is they don't get anything like that. So everything is templated, they're told to follow the rule book, don't think outside the box. If it looks like an infection, even slightly, treat it like an infection, give them antibiotics. And interestingly, it was exactly that attitude and that approach that caused Hasty to have her first seizure, because she was given antibiotics for an infection that she didn't have. She didn't have a high temperature. She didn't have any of the classic signs of an infection, but doctors, not knowing what it was, rather than thinking this might be something rare that we're just not aware of, they just said, let's just treat the thing that it might be, even though the symptoms aren't there. And that had an adverse reaction for Hasty.
So obviously, moving down the line, how long did it take for you to finally get that diagnosis?
It took 7 long and painful years. And during that 7 years, we were actually told, following a test, that Hasty did not have the condition that we now know she has. So they did a blood test, and they said, we've tested for CDLS, which they said she might have after a few years. The test came back negative. They said she doesn't have it. And then when she was 7, we were told, actually, she does have it. We got it wrong the last time. And the difficulty with that is that the medical system won't help you properly unless you have a diagnosis. And it just takes such a long time in the UK to get a diagnosis for a rare disease. It typically takes, on average, 4 years. And children and people with rare disease can expect, on average, to be misdiagnosed 3 times. And that means every time you're misdiagnosed, you're given the wrong treatment or the wrong advice, sent to the wrong place. You waste loads of time. And for Hasty, that meant we couldn't get her into the right school. We couldn't get her the right therapies or the treatments or medicines. She lost a year of education when she was thrust into a mainstream school where she wouldn't cope. And we knew she wasn't coping. But to save money, the council just said, no, we have to prove that this doesn't work. In other words, we have to let her fail for a whole year before we can give her what we know she needs, which is just a ridiculous, ridiculous situation to be in.
Yeah, and as a parent that wants the very best for their child all their life growing up, even when they're as an adult, you still want them to have the very best. It must have been so hard for you, and especially even more so for your wife, because mothers always suffer harder than dads, it appears. I don't know, we don't have that same type of connection, because we don't give birth to the child, do we? So they have a different connection to what we have. So it must be really hard for you, not alone your wife.
Yeah, it was incredibly hard, and when you've got a sick child, if your child is diagnosed with cancer, you don't expect to have to go to battle with the NHS to get chemotherapy or radiotherapy or whatever is required. You just expect someone to say, yeah, that's what you need. And they sign the piece of paper or click the buttons and it happens. But, that didn't happen for us because the UK doesn't get rare disease.
Yeah,
so
I think it happens too much as well outside the rare disease as well, because my best mate, he had esophageal cancer, and he wasn't eating. He wasn't acting normal. He was losing a lot of weight. He went to the doctors. They just said, "Oh, you got a tummy ache. You got this, that, and that." And eventually, after about a year, they decided then to get him tested, and then by then it was too late. He then terminal cancer, and we lost him later on. So I think it's happening too often, if that makes sense. Misdiagnosis, and not enough action going ahead throughout. And I don't think it's just rare disease. I think across the board, obviously we could go into other issues with the NHS and stuff like that because they're funding and what have you. However, when it comes to specific things like rare diseases like your child's got, there blatantly isn't enough out there, full stop. And it's young children like Hasty and others that are starting to suffer.
Yeah, Exactly. I mean, there are 7,000 rare diseases, and 95% of them have zero treatment options. So that means, there are 6,700 something diseases that have no treatment. And no one's looking for a treatment. No one's doing anything about it. I think Great Ormond Street Hospital is looking at about 200 of those. So we're still in the high 6,000s for diseases that no one cares about, essentially, you know? And I just don't think that's right. And I get that there's only so fast you can move and only so much can be done, but we're not even on like the first step of that ladder. And we as parents have been driven to climb this huge financial mountain. So our initial funding target was to raise £400,000 just to show that we can make a treatment for Hasty's condition. And then once we've got that, we then have to raise another at least £2 million so we can actually deliver it and give it to kids in clinical trials. And I think that's too much to ask of Chris Brannigan or any other parent who's also struggling to look after a sick child at the same time, plus 2 other kids, and work and pay tax, etc., etc.
So you've started up a charity because of this, haven't you? Do you want to explain a bit about your charity?
So we've set up a charity called Hope for Hasty, and our aim is to develop the first ever gene therapy for her rare disease, which is called CDLS. It only affects 400 kids in the UK. And as I said already, because it's rare, receives no funding. Pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in investing in small returns. So we're having to raise all this money. Our initial funding target was 400 grand. We've fortunately raised that now. We're working with a great lab in the States called the Jackson Laboratory, and they are developing that gene therapy as we speak. So we're hopeful that by Christmas time next year-ish, we'll have the first ever gene therapy that will transform the lives of kids with CDLS.
And where's Jackson? Where are they based in America?
They're based in Maine, and they're in the middle of a huge nature reserve in the northeastern corner of the United States. And they have a specialist rare and orphan disease center, and they are doing this work for us practically at cost. They are an amazing institution who are trying to change the lives of kids like Hasty who have rare conditions that really need some attention.
So obviously you're like me, we're not scientists, we're not doctors. We don't specialize in cures or fixing people in that sense. And the only way, like myself, we thought we can help is by raising awareness and trying to raise money. So at least if we can't help our loved one, it may help someone in the future not lose theirs. So let's talk about your epic adventure now, Chris. All right. First of all, give a very brief outline of what you plan to do.
So the aim of the event was to walk across Britain, starting in Land's End, going east to London, because we wanted to drop a petition at number 10, talking about improvements in care required for rare diseases, and then walk north to Edinburgh, a total of 700 miles. And the aim was to do that in about 35 days. I was carrying military kit with me, so I was wearing this, as you see me now, with sort of combat trousers on, carrying about 25 kilos of kit, so medical supplies, food, water, my sleeping bag, a little tent to sleep in, and some other bits and bobs that I needed just to live, basically. And I also did the whole thing barefoot.
Okay, so leading up to the first day, so the planning stage, how did your planning go?
So hold on, I'm going to disappear off screen here, because people probably think there's a lot of planning that went into this, and there was a support vehicle and there was a team behind me. There was no team. It was my wife, who was also working full time and looking after 3 kids and has these particular needs. There was no vehicle, no one else. And the planning started about 6 weeks before. And I did very little of it. I sort of procrastinated because I was afraid that this wouldn't take off, and I was just being a real man about it. And my wife had to grip me and say, we're going to look at this thing. So planning. This was the plan. It was done on a whiteboard. that is the whole plan, literally, and everything else was sort of done in our minds.
So for our listeners of the podcast who couldn't see that, he literally just had a whiteboard with a few scribblings on there of what's going to happen. Do you know what? That sounds very much like my first adventure that I went on. I was exactly the same. It was my wife that literally took hold of me and went, right, what's going on? What's the plan? Right, what do you need? And we got it done. So you sound very much like me, to be honest. So that was your planning going up to day one. How are you feeling on prior to that first step from that iconic start line?
You know, at the start, I made a video because we wanted to sort of announce, and the important thing was we hadn't pre-announced anything, you know, so we hadn't told the world I'm going to do this thing. The plan was to make a video in front of that sort of Land's End sign, which is iconic, and say, this is what I'm doing, this is the money we want to raise, and this is the cause. And then set off. It took me about 2 hours to make that video because it was just in a shambles in my mind, and I couldn't quite get it right, and it was blowing a gale outside. And people kept coming up and saying, what are you doing? And asking me questions, which was really cool, but distracting. And once I finished that and I actually started walking, I felt good. I thought, right now, this is the main event. I'm here to walk from, you know, A to B every day. And now I've started. And I met some people immediately outside sort of Land's End, sort of, you know, viewpoint, who asked me what I was doing. And they were like, wow, that's amazing. And they gave me a sort of initial boost. But to be honest, within the first 30 minutes, I realized that my feet were not ready and my feet were really, really suffering.
So that initial first few steps, did you have nervousness? Do you have butterflies in your belly? Obviously, half an hour in, you were like, oh God, what have I just done? It sound, you know, did you obviously your feeling shift from nervousness to, oh my God? Was that basically how it was?
Yeah, I think the first day was really it was a bit of a mix of emotions. I was excited to get started because, you know, it had taken weeks to get to the start line of, you know, from our whiteboard, and, you know, just trying to figure out what I was going to wear and all that kind of detail. And seeing the people were enthused about what I was doing and were noticing me because I was wearing a big sort of blue sign above my day sack that said barefoot across Britain. You know, that I thought, okay, this is good. You know, that was the aim. People are noticing what I'm doing. We want people to take notice and donate, hopefully. But yeah, in my feet, I cut both my big toes. So I ripped lumps of flesh off the end of them because I was carrying too much weight. I was heavy. That happened in the first 40 minutes. So I was already had injuries on both feet, not serious, but irritating that I'd suffered that so early on. And by the time I got to Penzance, which was only 12 miles in of the first day being like 22 miles long, I was already quite tired. It was a really hot day, and some of the road surfaces were just like terrible to walk on. So my progress was really slow, and I thought I'd be able to run fast all day, and instead I was actually sort of hobbling along like an old man.
So you nailed your first day, and that took you to whereabouts in Cornwall?
I finished in a place called Helston,
yeah.
And my wife had arranged that same day to for me to camp out in Helston on the rugby pitch, and they had agreed to let me use their showers and stuff, which was really good. And while I was there, I was just explaining to the guys who were training, you know, what I was up to, and they were like, "Wow, that's great. You know, we'll follow you and donate and all that kind of stuff." And after they all left, and I pitched my tent, and I was ready to sort of get my head down for the night, one of them came back, a guy called John, and he said, "I was really taken by what you're trying to do, and the way you're doing it. You know, and I want to walk with you tomorrow." And having walked all of day one on my own, I thought, "Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, come along." And he said, "I'm going to do it barefoot as well." And I said, "Mate, please don't." I've already done one day and I am really in bad shape. So I don't want you to suffer as well. But I couldn't dissuade him. And we both walked together all through the second day, barefoot. And I think that was a real help, actually, because I wasn't suffering alone. He was with me, and it was really hard. But, you know, we just chatted together. He had his AirPods. I wore one. He wore the other one. We sang along to music, so that got me through day 2.
Brilliant. And obviously, I caught up with you day 3 as you came through Plymouth. Now, I was just sitting at the table having some dinner, and my wife just so happened to see your page come up on her feed. I think someone might have shared it, because we have a lot of connections with the Cornish down there, because my family are down there. We've got a lot of friends down there. So someone shared your page and it came up on her feed, and she went, "He's coming through Plymouth. Do you want to join him?" And I just automatically, without hesitation, went, "Yeah." Because I knew exactly what, 2 seconds, my screen's just flipped. Hold on a second. There we go. Yeah, I knew exactly how it felt having company during my adventures compared to when you don't have company.
Yeah.
So obviously straight away she messaged your wife because she was running some of your social media to find out when you were coming through and stuff like that. And I met you as you came off the ferry at Plymouth, and you were in pretty good spirits by that, because obviously the guys from Raleigh came out and said hello. Some others came along and joined you, so you were in reasonably good spirits. But I could see you were in pain with your feet by this point, and any bit of grass was like luxury. The difference between sort of going into Poundland and going into Tesco's type thing.
Yeah.
The difference in your face when it seems your foot was on grass, it was great. So I met you on day 3, and I've followed you ever since. I've watched all your videos on Instagram and Facebook, and I've seen the differences between your moods, dropping to your lowest point and up there flying with the eagles, because I know someone's maybe bought you a box of raspberries, or they've walked with you carrying your bucket, relieving you, for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. What was that roller coaster like of having those emotions for you?
Oh, it was, it really surprises me now on reflection. At the time, I didn't have much chance to look at it and analyze it, but on reflection, I went from the highest highs to the lowest lows and vice versa in heartbeats. And I recall one day I was going to Yeovilton, and it was meant to be a long day. It was meant to be 26 miles. And I was having a reasonably good day. And there was one point of the journey where I had to do a hard right and turn, and I missed it. And I'd already done 20 miles or something at this point. So I added on another mile, and I had a laugh to myself, and I made a video, said, "Oh, I've missed it, and I'll go back now and I'll turn." And I missed it again on the way back somehow. So by the time I got to about 24, 25 miles, I was already mentally giving up. I was like, I've done my mileage. I'm not going to make it. This is just so horrible, and I was sitting in a ditch, literally just feeling sorry for myself. And then next thing, this car, like a little blue sort of Corsa, comes like hurtling down the road and pulls in on the other side of the road. And I'm thinking, what's that maniac doing? And this bloke jumps out of the passenger seat, and he's got, combat trousers on and a sort of blue Army Air Corps t-shirt. And he puts his Bergen on, he puts his webbing on, and sort of runs across the road and says, "Oh, I'm here to pick you up. We're going into Yeovilton." And I went from being like, "Oh, this is terrible," to, "Okay, yeah, let's start going." And then about another half a mile down the road, I picked up another 8 guys and girls from the same unit who were all, stood in ranks, ready to go. And I was like, all of a sudden I was like stratospheric, as you said, up with the eagles. And we ran for 5 miles solid. I'm carrying 25 kilos of kit and shuffling in bare feet, just running and running and running, because they just picked me up. Like emotionally, they took me right to the top. And yeah, and we made it all the way in.
It's amazing. So you must have, at some points, gone to yourself, I feel like Forrest Gump here, having all these people with you at some point. Did you ever think to yourself like that?
Yeah, because, we published the route every night. People would show up in the morning and sort of tag on for usually the whole day, but some people would join for an hour. Some people would join us in the middle. They'd see us by chance and just say, "Oh, I'm going to jump in for a mile." But when it was really challenging, my mind was very focused on just keeping moving, and trying not to think too much about how painful it was. So sometimes people would join the group and I'd sort of like say, "Hey, how's it going?" And ask their name, and I wouldn't get to speak to them, and then they would disappear before I got to speak to them because they had to drop off again in a while. So there was this ever sort of growing concertina of people. So it was a bit like Forrest Gump sometimes, but I met loads of incredible people along the way, which was great.
I mean, obviously, when you even if you have someone for just a mile, it makes such a difference, doesn't it, for you mentally? Because suddenly you're talking, and your mind's not thinking about your feet as much. Your mind's not thinking about the pain that's going through your legs and stuff like that. You've shifted. But when you go back to being by yourself, how bad did you get? How low in that trough did it make you feel?
Really low. And I realized from those moments that the whole battle was mental. Although there were times I was really tired and really in a lot of pain, 90% of the battle was all in my head. So when I was on my own, and you're sore, you become negative, obviously. And then your mind wanders to other things. And I'm thinking about Hasty, and I'm worried about her future. I've still got kids at home, and my wife has told me that morning that one of them's got an ear infection. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? What is the point of this? And when you've got a big loud voice at the front of your head that says, this is daft, you need to stop, you're really sore, you're going to hurt yourself. And it's only a tiny little voice at the back of your head that says, no, keep going. That's really hard to overcome. And what I thought was great was, again, on reflection, some of the best people I ran with were being the positive voice. So they were providing the volume. So I ran with a guy called Jake Dean for 3 days. He took 3 days off work to run with me when I was at my absolute lowest. And for 3 days, he talked at me almost, and he just said, Chris, look at that bit of road. That is lovely and smooth. You're loving that. Bit of shade, lovely cool breeze. 2 more miles, I'm going to give you a banana. So he became the positive voice in my head and just kept driving me forward.
So obviously when you didn't have the sport and you're feeling low, you sort of briefly mentioned it. What did you do to try and counter the negative thoughts that are going through your head? Did you listen to music? Did you just think, obviously of your daughter and the reason why you were doing it? What was the stuff that kept you going in the end?
Yeah. I tried lots of things. I love audiobooks. I tried to listen to audiobooks. That didn't work at all because I couldn't concentrate on what was being said, or I couldn't track a story for more than 10 seconds. Music was good at sort of distracting me in general, but, couldn't overcome the big loud sort of, you can't do it voice. So I over a period of days and weeks, realized there were sort of 3 things I needed to think about. The first one was realizing that even though it's terrible now, I kept saying the road will get better. Around the corner, it'll be better, or over the hill, it'll be smooth, or there'll be grass or something, and I just had small aiming markers, just get around the corner. The other one was just to say, have a rest. If you get really tired, just sleep, lie down and just sleep, or have a bite to eat and just stop. The pain will go away, you'll feel better, your mood will improve, go again. And the last one was just to remember why you're doing it, that this isn't just for fun, it's for your little girl. And for me, that was the clincher every time, that got me back up and taking steps.
I think that is the most important thing for a lot of people that do epic adventures like that, is the reason why you're doing it in the first place. You think like, what would happen if you didn't finish compared to what would happen if you did finish. No, obviously there would be no shame if you hadn't finished, but it was that more important of how much more you could gain if you had. That keeps you going. And I've been there, so I can really sympathise on that level. But you had some touch and go moments all the way along. It wasn't, people turned up, you had a great time, you didn't have a great time when they went. It wasn't that simple. You had some quite touch and go moments with your feet, didn't you?
Yeah. When I got to Basingstoke, I think 13 days in, the first 2 weeks were the hardest. And I got to Basingstoke, I had open wounds on the balls of both my feet. So when you've got to take 50,000 steps a day on an open wound, that is excruciating. And I went into the hospital to A&E, and they said, and the balls of my feet were full of pus. So I was walking on this like little bubble of pus in each of my feet. Again, agony. And I said, look, or they said, you need to stop. You need to take at least 2 days, antibiotics, get your feet up in the air, ice them. Otherwise, your feet will become so broken you won't be able to finish. To which I said, I've got to get to London. We've got an appointment in London to drop this letter off in 2 days' time. Yeah. So I had to keep going for 2 days. It was excruciating, but I then, and again, that was when Jake was with me, and he pulled me through, and I managed to get 2 days rest in London, and that was a game changer for me. I think I was getting unhealthier and unhealthier for the first 2 weeks. I had cold sores, I was losing weight fast, and I had these injuries, and my morale was going down. But 2 days rest, I think my body was able to sort of reinforce itself. I ate loads, I slept loads, and after that, I was sort of on an upward trajectory.
But you made it. You got to Edinburgh, 700 miles away, via 10 Downing Street. You dropped that letter off to the big man himself. It took you 35 days to complete. That last footstep that you took at the end of your journey, how was it? Did you feel, thank God, no more, and a sense of relief? Or did you think, it's not over yet, I've still got a long way of other battles to fight, even though you finished the journey?
It sort of builded, the last day we did 29 miles. So I could see Edinburgh from 16 miles away. You could see Edinburgh like on the horizon, and the castle stood on top of a hill, which is where we were going to finish. And the first part of the day, really good, excited because it's the last day. I know I don't have to get up tomorrow and do my foot admin and run again and be tired and punish myself. So, but then as I got closer and closer to Edinburgh, and the finish line was creeping closer, I was more and more impatient to finish. I just wanted to get to the end. And when I turned on to the Royal Mile, so the street that leads up to the castle, and there were loads of people there just lining the route up to the castle, and the bagpipes were playing. I was just like filled with a sense of relief. But then I saw my little girl, Hasty, sort of silhouetted at the top of the street, and she was like already at a run coming towards me. And I just just took the wind out of my sails. I fell to my knees. She gave me a hug. I just cried into her shoulder. I couldn't tell you why, to be honest. I think just knowing we had met the financial target and exceeded it, and we could now do this really important work, and knowing that I could spend time with the family, and knowing that I didn't have to go through the pain anymore, was just like a flood of emotions.
What was your initial target at the start of the event?
So I think there's two things to say about this. To pay for the research, we wanted to raise £400,000, and we, through other fundraising activities before the challenge, we'd already raised about 170 something. But, COVID, the pandemic and lockdown just wiped us out, so we were really in a bad place. And we thought if we could raise 50 grand from this event, that would be great. We'll be more than halfway to our goal. In the end, by the time we finished, we had raised over £600,000, which was just blew our minds.
So you're ever closer to that bigger target that you need to hit. That must make you feel amazing, really, because obviously your goal was 50,000 for the event, plus obviously what you already previous rate to over 600,000. That must be amazing, and a big weight off your shoulder, because you're a lot closer than what you were before, 35 days prior.
That's incredible. We were raising some days 10 or 15 grand a day, and I was just I would screenshot it every night and do a quick comparison. I couldn't comprehend the numbers and how fast it was moving, because the support we had was incredible. But yeah, now I can sit here and talk to you and feel like I'm not scrambling to raise pounds and pennies right now. We still have a lot of money to raise, but it's taking a huge weight off, because we're hoping that once we've done the research and we've got all the money we need now, that we'll be able to get someone on board, or an organization that will say, okay, well, we can run the clinical trials for you, and then they'll sell the medicine, and that's how they'll recoup their costs and make some money, and then our little girl can be healthy.
And what did your family think prior to you with the idea of you coming up with this, and what do they think now you've done it?
I think my kids, particularly my two boys, being sort of older and understanding the world a bit better, they thought I was a madman, because when I started training, I literally just walked. I walked with them. We went for a walk. I was barefoot, and I was like, this is a bit pointy. I don't really like this. And they were like, how are you going to walk across the whole country? You can't even get 2 miles down the road. So I think they thought I was mad. But my wife was always optimistic, and she drove me, to be honest. If it wasn't for my wife, I either wouldn't have done it or I wouldn't have finished. She was the engine behind the machine.
I hear you on that one.
Yeah. And now I think the kids are so proud. My wife's so happy that we've done everything we could have done.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've done is absolutely phenomenal. And I've got friends that do adventure running of all forms, multi-day events and stuff like that. And you're up there, especially my barefoot friends that like to do what you do for fun. But their feet are a lot more, let's just say, prepared for these type of things compared to what yours was. I just think it's phenomenal. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to have a quick 10 quick fire questions. And then we'll finish off with a final question for you to end the show. So first of all, question number 1: what was your favourite snack during the adventure?
Oh, favourite snack, ice lollies. So we had some really hot days, and some lovely people would show up with ice lollies. I was like, yes, I really, really needed ice lolly.
They are godsends. Okay, your favourite county that you went through?
Oh God, it's so hard. I think Cornwall, because it was the first one, and I was so nervous about starting, and everybody was so positive, and it exploded at the start, because I think people in Cornwall just got behind it. I was causing traffic problems all over the county because people were stopping to give me money, and I was like, I feel bad, I'm stopping traffic, but nobody was cross. It was amazing.
Yeah, Cornwall's fabulous. I mean, if it wasn't for my friends down in Cornwall, I wouldn't have known that you were doing this. So, yeah, Cornwall's lovely. What's your favourite meal? One you like to tuck into?
Oh, what do I like to eat? I like loads of food, but I think I really enjoy Thai food. You can't beat Thai food. So the day we finished, we went out and I had some Thai food straight away, which was a real treat.
Excellent. Favourite music that you listened to on the trip?
I listened to the same sort of stream over and over again. It was the hits of the 80s, which was there's some depressing ones in there that I had to sort of skip past, but there's some just really upbeat, amazing songs that you can sing along to when you're running.
Are you a fan of Marmite? Yes or no?
No.
Have you ever been to the Army Navy game?
I have not, actually. I'm a bit odd in that regard.
Wow. You need to get on the next one. Okay. During your trip, what was your favourite to walk on, the road or dirt trail?
Road, definitely. I grew to fear dirt trails and their gravelly surfaces.
Pineapple on a pizza, yes or no?
Yeah.
Did you have a proper Cornish pasty during your time in Cornwall?
Loads. At some point, I had about 7 in my day sack because people kept giving them to me.
Brilliant. And the last quick fire question, would you do it again?
Oh, if I said it, someone asked me on the finish line, and the answer is yes. If I had to get to the finish line and someone said, "This is my kid. We're in the same place. Can you walk back?" I'd have had a cry, but I've said yes.
Yeah, I totally, fully understand with you. So that's the quick fire questions. Finally, if anyone was thinking about doing a crazy adventure, a multi-day event, like what you do or like what I do you have any advice for them?
I would say, even though you're probably scared of getting started, particularly if it's your first one, just grab it. It's amazing. Although we had those terrible lows, that was part of the adventure, and I think I've come out the other side a wiser person. And I was going to say something else there and I've totally forgotten now, but I would say, yeah, don't overplan. That's half the fun. It's just figuring out what happens on the route and tell people in advance, and that way you can't back out.
And should any of the watchers or listeners want to follow you and donate and all that sort of stuff, where can they find you?
So if they just Google Hope for Hasty, HASTI, they'll find our Just Giving page. If they want to do that, on there you can see some of the things that other people are doing for raising money for Hope for Hasty. Like, there's a guy who ran 5 marathons in one day. Blew my mind. And they'll also find our Facebook and Instagram pages where they can sort of follow our story and they can look back and see what I get up to over those 35 days. Excellent.
I'll drop some links in the description anyway, so people can also find out through there. It's been absolutely brilliant catching up with you, Chris. I was so pleased to be a tiny bit of your journey through Dartmoor and through Plymouth. I'm glad you're recovering, which is the main part, and I'm glad your family, all things considered, are doing well. Have you got anything in the future that I should be aware of?
I have nothing planned for myself right now. I've gone straight back to work, so I'm sort of like furiously trying to catch up on the 1,000 emails I received. But we have more things coming. So if people check out our Hope for Hasty sort of social media, they can track us. And I just want to say thanks, Owen, because I caught you at a really early part of the journey and you had loads of experience and I had your voice in my head the whole way through, honestly. So I remember thinking, oh, I'm thirsty now. And then I'll be like, oh, Owen said you have to drink before you're thirsty, eat before you're hungry, sleep before you're tired.
And have a shit before you need a shit.
Well, I didn't know I could say that on your channel, but yeah, exactly.
It's all right, you can swear on. No, it's brilliant. It's been great catching up with you, Chris. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I will pause the recording for now and then we'll have a finished chat afterwards. Thank you very much, Chris, for giving us your time on If My Feet Could Talk.
Thanks.
That was absolutely fantastic. What an amazing guy Chris is. Such a tough thing to do, really. But when it's for your own child, who wouldn't have done it? I know I would have. I've done things like this for my best mate. So if it was my child, I'd go to the ends of the earth, exactly the same as Chris. I really enjoyed catching up with him. I've loved following his journey all the way up, and I will continue to do so. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe, download, give us a review on the various podcast apps. And if you're watching this via YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell, get your notifications. Until next time on If My Feet Could Talk, I'm the Ultra Man in Matlow. Laters.